Well, good evening. We have another opportunity to talk about T and Do and Jesus, the Father and Jesus, in the backside of the book, the backside of the teachings from the next level. The backside meaning what comes after that, what they say, and what refers to the history of what they say in prophecy and in what Jesus taught. And that's what my book focuses on, and that I've been trying to do these little Revelations 11 series of videos on, so that those that want to know have a chance to see what might be one of the more accurate translations of Scripture. I'm not saying I'm totally accurate. I don't know. Joe didn't go through all this kind of stuff with us. It was never part of his task and T's task to spend any time per se on the Bible. They did acknowledge that they were the two witnesses. They were fulfilling that task. And they did acknowledge that, and Do did acknowledge that T was the woman in Revelations 12:1. And then there are other subjects related to the New Testament and Old Testament that Do talked about mostly in the Beyond Human tapes. And what he and T said from the beginning was that we could trust the red letter edition of the Bible, because the red letters were the color of the lettering that was used for the words that Jesus was quoted to have said. Do believed that a number of individuals were given the task by Jesus to take notes sometimes, and that's why the 3 different accounts or 4 different accounts have so many similarities but are not exact. And bring out different aspects, because different students would hear things in different ways a little bit here and there, and some would be more thorough about in their notes. So with that said, I'm going to start with the verse that Revelation 11:13, verse 13, chapter 11, verse 13. And the same hour was there a great earthquake, and 1/10 part of the city fell, and in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were affrighted, and gave glory to the God of heaven. Well, I should have reviewed a little more of what I wrote, because I'm not really on the top of my head remembering some of what I came up with, but this was one of the most difficult verses to try to interpret and retranslate and interpret. But I'll go through the parts that are pretty clear, I believe, first. And that is, when we're talking about the same hour, I believe that's referring to a 40-year period that started approximately when T and Do met in 1972. But it might have started, T and Do would always say it started in the 70s. is when they started to come into their vehicles. And having tagged those vehicles in the 20s and 30s. And so 70 to 80 to 90 to 2000 to 2010, that would be the 40 years that I believe refers to when this great shaking takes place, the hour of time. That's next level time. It also could mean, the event. So it's not like that would be wrong to say, but I try to look at all the meanings, because what I found is that any meanings we can think of probably have some degree of accuracy. I'm not going to say all of them do, because I know people could come up with things that are so out there that, in ways that are not evident throughout in the context of these verses. And in line with the fact that Jesus said that he would be revealed when he came back, and the revealing hasn't really taken place 100%. It did take place 100% when Doe went public in 1990s, and in particular in 1994, and then 1995 with the document that they put on the World Wide Web that was named Undercover Jesus Surfaces Before Departure, that clearly admits to Doe admits to being the return of the Son of the Father, the one that was in the vehicle named Jesus. He puts Jesus in quotes in that title for that document, because he knew that the name Jesus was associated with that vehicle that was prepared for the older member from the next level to take over in order to perform the task that he had to do at that time, which was set up the criteria for the salvation. And the salvation meant graduation from the human kingdom into membership in the kingdom of heaven, in the heavens. The level, and it also had to do with the saving of souls by believing in who he was and what he said, and as different grades in school for the individuals that were most attracted to T&O when they first came public in 1975. So, and the reason why there was a small number was because there was a small number that were potentially able to graduate because of the relationships they had with the next level before then. In the Jesus camp, as Doe said, and in the Moses camp, as Doe also said and demonstrated, in certain things that took place in the classroom. When all of us were given names of someone that our soul was either first starting to come from or was interfacing with the human vehicle at that time. And I've said in the past what that name was for me, but I don't want to get into that now, because I end up wanting to talk about me more than other things, and I don't really care about me. I do care about me because I'm not totally overcome my humanness, but I don't care about me so much that I'm not willing to lose everything on the human level in order to complete the grade in school that I'm able to complete at this time, which I'm not the judge of what that grade is, then just like nobody is the judge of what anybody else's grade is or whether they can graduate at this time. So there's no reason for someone not to try if they feel inclined, if they feel like it means that much to them. And if it doesn't mean that much to them, then that doesn't mean that they're lost or anything. It just means that well, the blades of grass grow at different rates, and some of them pass each other up before they actually get to their full height, whatever that is. And so so we can't judge one another where we're at all. So it's worthless to try. And it's actually detrimental to try, I believe. So anyway, so I'm going to get to the next word here, that during that same hour, which there is to cause to be. And the same hour there caused to be generated, see here, there caused to be generated a great earthquake. Now, there's places where it talks about earthquakes, but in like the Old Testament, and Jesus talked about you would see earthquakes. But this is saying that there will be a great earthquake. And great is actually megas, and it has to do with loud, mighty, high, large, strong, sore, afraid, frightening, in other words, big. So those are all forms of that word, Greek word megas. So I think that a number of those words, actually, maybe even all of them, relate to what this earthquake is going to be like. And this earthquake was actually from the word seismos, which is so familiar with the word, the seismographs that are taking readings as we speak all over the world, actually, of earthquake activity. And just like the humans are monitoring all the sun activity now, the humans are monitoring all earthquake activity and all sun volcanic activity that they can, with all kinds of sensors everywhere. And the reason why it's such a major motion or effort is, I believe, because the next level designed it to where those would be the biggest signs on Earth and in the heavens. Sun in the heavens, and on Earth, earthquakes and volcanoes and storms and roaring seas was one of the things that Jesus said we would see at this time. And so we saw those tsunamis. That were evidence of what was to come even greater when the recycling actually takes place, but is not going to happen. Well, I don't know how much it's going to happen. It might happen a lot between now and then, and it might happen in spurts between now and then, so that people have a chance to recover from experiences like that. I'm not just talking about recovering by like rebuilding your house and your city, recovering to get like a breath of fresh air to their spirit, recognizing the value of life in a more in-depth way, and having a sense that they survived it because they have something to do in the world. And I would suggest that that's something to do. The highest calling could be to gravitate to what Tian-Do taught, because that's the only way to get to the kingdom of heaven. That was taught, that can be got to by belief alone, by the distortion, the individuals that distorted Jesus' teachings. And Moses' teachings were also distorted after he left. And that's the way it works. And that also then provides a full opportunity for people to believe what they want to believe, or justify what they want to justify, or put effort into what they want to put effort into. And so, so this commotion, I believe, had a number of how do you say it, manifestations on earth and in the human kingdom through the coup d'etat that happened when the Supreme Court in the United States ruled that the Florida Supreme Court shouldn't recount the votes because it was such a close vote between Al Gore and George Bush, George W. Bush, not H.W., that was his dad. But but that was like, a little introduction to the motivation to stimulate or look the other way, or even design entirely, or design with other governments involved, in order to cover for looking like they were responsible for the 9/11 attacks. I don't know if that was intentional 100%, but I do know that there was a document written by the committee that was called the Progress for a New American Century, PNAC. And Sybil Edmonds talks about this, if you want to look at her videos on YouTube. But it's been talked about ever since 9/11 because it was such a interesting correlation with 9/11 attacks and what followed that with the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Because what it said in the document that the individuals that were on this committee called PNAC, Progress for a New American Century, were individuals like Cheney and Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz, and those are the three names that I know were on there. And so they actually signed a document, or some of them signed a document that was named Rebuilding America's Defenses, which is still available also. Well, last time I checked, it was still available to read. And in that document, they said that they needed an event like Pearl Harbor in order to sell the American people on rebuilding the defenses, the military. And so when 9/11 took place, they had already, the administration had already decided to reinvade Iraq. And that came out also through leaks from people in very high places that was reported on Democracy Now! All this was reported on Democracy Now! In terms of the potential that there was, that the U.S. secret government, CIA, NSA, sought to create that event in order to stimulate that event, or stimulate those that wanted to bring about such an event, provided a way for them to do it and get away with it. I mean, you know, which there's evidence of as well, that the FBI had some evidence of, and Sybil Edmonds was part of the evidence of that, but she was given a gag order in order to not be, I guess, arrested and tried for treason or something, whatever, I don't know, but she can't talk about certain things. But she can, but she found a little way around that to some degree, is what I'm saying, actually. So she's worth watching her videos, even though it doesn't really matter. The fact was that even if it was not stimulated by humans in the secret government or the direct government, it was used, and there's a certain amount of stimulus that the United States had in their occupation of areas in the Middle East, like having a military base in Saudi Arabia near Mecca. You know, what the Islamic people consider their holiest location on earth, which was one of the complaints that Osama bin Laden had, that he talked about. It was documented that he talked about, along with other things. A lot of activity that the United States has had in the Middle East before 9/11, and not only in the Middle East, but in a lot of places, right? So, so that's a form of stimulus when you're, you know, creating unrest and you're getting militarily involved, and you've got, you know, people supporting the rebels and different groups, and like they did especially for the Contras in Nicaragua, and they used running drugs to pay for that, so that they wouldn't have to use budgeted money, try to figure out how to slant, you know, direct budgeted money in that direction. And that was also reported to be happening in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, with the CIA running drugs and whatever else, weapons, potentially, and whatever contraband, I guess, whatever, I don't know what else. But that was reported by some insiders, actually. Actually, one of them was, I think, Bill Lear, who was the son of the Learjet inventor or designer or maker, and he was flying missions, not part of the Air Force or any other services, but there were a lot of secret things that he was delivering back and forth in Southeast Asia. And he's the one that talked about how there was a triangle or for the opium trade and the heroin business. And then the LA Times came out with a big spread on how cocaine and crack was flooded into the inner cities of New York and Los Angeles. Maybe New York the most, and maybe other cities as well. But and that was largely CIA driven. I remember when the LA Times came out with that, it was a very controversial article. But so there's been things happening for a long time that were stimulating that 9/11 earthquake. Quaking. It also did shake the earth, literally. The seismographs did go off in some places. I don't know where exactly, but I read in a scientific periodical on the internet that it had shook the earth. So then it went on to say, and 10th part, which the word part is actually 10th. So part doesn't necessarily need to be there. So it's, and 10th city, a town with walls of greater or lesser size, which also implies people of there, of course, are in the city. So a 10th city fell. Now I went and counted all the buildings in New York City, all the tall buildings, and of course, that's kind of impossible to, there's certainly more than 10 buildings in New York City, and or 100. There's certainly more than 100 buildings in New York City that you could say that. No, I guess it would be, there's certainly more than 10 buildings in New York City that are very tall, okay? So that you could say the 10th part, no, so I guess there'd be like, if 20 fell, if there were 20 big tall buildings in New York City, then a 10th of that would be 2. And we had 2, actually we had 3, because building 7 was taken down by explosives, and on purpose, even though there wasn't any evidence that it was going to fall down on its own. There was only one part that was damaged on one of the corners, and maybe windows were damaged, but anyway, they took that down the same day, which was very strange, of course. And, well, maybe it was the next day. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. I'm not positive about if I got that timeline right. But I didn't think, when I ended up counting all the buildings and everything, it was interesting because there was one building that was named, well, it had the number 666 and it had some stuff on it and all that. But anyway, I don't want to get into all that until I get to those verses that talk about that. But when it says 10th city fell, or 10 city fell, because it doesn't have to be 10th. It's from Decca. Well, let's see the way 10th was used. 2120. A 5th, 6th, 10th. Okay, so it's got that descriptive way, and I can look at some others, but it's probably good enough to look at that. But if anybody wants to follow me follow up with this, and give me more examples of how this probably does mean exactly what it says as 10th, but not necessarily as part. So, and 10th city fell. Now, what could that mean in relationship to prophecy? And when I say prophecy, I'm talking about how all these Revelations prophecies have relationships with both what Jesus said in the Gospels and what was described from between Genesis and especially in the Moses camp, and then after that, and then in the Jesus camp, like I said, and which I'm not going to be able to try to. I'm just going to try to give you some bottom lines now on what that 10 could mean. And and so what I arrived at was that it was referring to the 10 tribes that was considered the kingdom of Israel after Judah and the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin split off because of a falling out they had with the replacement for King Solomon, if I remember that right. Because Judah and Benjamin felt like they were doing things that were breaking the laws of Moses and Jehovah, and Jehovah provided. So that became the kingdom of Israel that we see now. And so, in a sense, that could be said to that that's who fell. The Jews, basically, the Israeli Jews that live in the Middle East. I'm not saying that each individual Jew now represents that. That's not for me to say. There's nothing better or worse about the people. But where they came from can have the heritage. But we don't know from one to the next whether they have the heritage of being from those 10 tribes as opposed to being from those 2 tribes that broke away. Thinking that those 2 tribes that broke away were later scattered, and so as they all were scattered, and that they also found their way into Europe and into Russia and into all over the world. But New York City, the America actually, the most part, has about as many people in New York City and the United States as there are in Israel. And we all know that many of the Jewish people from the Jewish heritage are among some of the richest in New York City and also the most influential, and are in the banking industry big time, and are in the entertainment and media industry big time. So so that's, in a sense, what took a hit, because after all that is based on wealth. But it's not just related to people that identify as being Jewish, not at all, because many Christians are also part of those 10 tribes, I believe. And that's what was called the kindred. I think that's what kindred would include over here in Revelation. When it said, and the people and the kindreds are like the race or clan. It's the actual but offshoots also, and a tribe. See, that's who the two witnesses. That's who are witnessing the fall of the actual subduing and eventual death of the two witnesses, which we know took place in the United States as T and Doe in 1997 when they left their bodies. Well, T left her body in 1985, which according to Revelation 12 talks about would occur before the rest, Doe, who had been advanced to the throne by that point to work the throne by himself, having worked the throne with T before that. Now he was working the throne by himself to finish the task, so T could be outside her vehicle to help with the completion of the task, and help Doe with the completion of the task, and help the students decide whether they wanted to complete the task or leave. The decisions were always there, and there were many opportunities for people to leave, and that's why so many left. Not because nobody left because of an abuse of any kind. That should tell you something, because all the other groups, the dropouts, will have stories of abuse, or stories about how their leader was, living in a lap of luxury while they were, doing without, and things like that. None of those stories exist with T and Doe, even though there was probably over the course of the time, probably over 100 dropouts from their classroom. Some of them were just joined that didn't even know necessarily why. It just sounded interesting to take a ride on a UFO, and they believed that was a possibility, so they hooked up. And but when that didn't transpire the way they thought it would, in time frame that they thought it would, and that T and Doe even set them up to think was possible, they left. And that was good, because if you joined for that reason, you wouldn't make it through. You wouldn't be voluntarily giving your all, because you were interested in some kind of payoff that was irrelevant. Because T and Doe considered a UFO just like a bus, a city bus. Not that it's as simple as that. It's not. Doe said that next level spacecraft can have many, many, many sophisticated functions, and can even be a vehicle, like a humanoid vehicle, but a vehicle that's not humanoid, but is like a flesh body, a different kind of flesh, because the next level doesn't have the same kind of flesh. Next level members, their bodies that they grow on a vine don't have the same kind of flesh as the human flesh. So back over to the same Alley Great earthquake, and at 10, the city fell. So when the financial center that is based on 2, which is interesting, because how Jesus said that you could only have one master, but he only had 2 choices. And it was between the kingdom of God and mammon. And mammon represented what was treasure and wealth. And so the treasure and wealth of New York City and America was the biggest symbol of that in the world, actually, was shaken. And fell. And literally the city fell. They fell down. How did the next level know that was going to happen? Well, I don't know exactly, but I do know that sometimes the Luciferians, I may be wrong about this, but I do know that Tiendo did talk about how the Luciferians were always creating a facsimile of the next level, or what the next level does. And they're always also trying to second guess what the next level is going to do. And that includes how these prophecies are going to come out, because the lower forces become, the Luciferian space alien fallen angels become aware of what these scriptures say. And so they start programming humans to interpret them a certain way and look at them a certain way. And they even seem to stimulate their taking place so that they can take credit for it, in a sense. I'm not getting it right exactly. I know I'm kind of reaching here, but because it's something new to my consciousness to think about this now. Well, an example was that Tiendo said that not all of the spacecrafts that crashed were next level spacecrafts. That after the fact that the next levels crashed some spacecrafts, the Luciferian space aliens crashed some spacecrafts in order to confuse humans so that they wouldn't, so they would lump them into the same category of all being the same beings, the same kind of beings, even though they probably had different physical body structures. But there might have been some in the next level crashes that had the equivalent body structures to what some of the space alien vehicles might have. Although I might be wrong about that. Maybe the space alien vehicles all have a mammalian characteristics now. Even though originally because the space aliens are actually souls. So what I'm talking about by having mammalian characteristics is I'm talking about how they are vibrating on mammalian behaviors still, and that when they create their hybridized vehicles, they're mixing and matching the genetic code through the sperm and the eggs between whatever vehicles existed that they had access to, that they decide to use to be the host for the birth of a new vehicle that they can then raise the way they want to and then take over. The way they also take over human leaders that Tiendo taught about, of countries. Because they influence and take over individuals that provide the most opportunity to influence the most people. Because their objective is to turn the eyes of humans away from the next level and its reality. So they will put across the idea that the next level is a spiritual realm, like cosmic consciousness or universal mind is an example of that. Or that they float around on clouds and play harps and live in this blissful condition which they do live in a condition of bliss, but it's bliss because they have all kinds of interesting tasks to do, and they know who they're connected to. That's the biggest bliss that they have. They know they're with their older member, and that's so pleasing to them because they know that their older member is the one that made all the sacrifices in order to bring them up through the ranks to their birth and to their spirit birth, as Jesus talked about it. That required the disciples to come back from 2,000 years ago and take flesh bodies that Doe said was a water body. Flesh. He said it was that you have to be born again of water in order to be born of spirit, and so born of water, Doe said, was being born of human flesh. Anyway, so I forgot where I was. Well, I was talking about the two and how two buildings then seems to represent the two Christs. The witnesses are both Christ, according to Zechariah, who also identified them as two olive trees and two candlesticks, just like here in Revelations 11. That's what I was talking about, how Zechariah was an Old Testament prophet, perhaps the last one before Jesus came, and he had all this to say in chapter 4 that was saying that an angel was giving him this information, a messenger. And so we're not related so strongly with Revelation 11, 7, or whatever verse it was that I just passed over. I forget the numbers a lot of times. It's like, how can you not take notice that he was saying that they were both anointed ones? And anointed, if you look up the word Christ, is said to be, Christ is someone who is anointed with oil. If you actually look up the meaning of that, then you can see that the oil is the represents the container for the light, I believe is the best way to say that. Because it's by burning that the container, by sacrificing the container, that light is given off. And we're sacrificing the container when we decide to give ourselves entirely to tea and dough. Not necessarily by laying down our life, although that's what was given to those students who were graduating to do by Doe, and so that was right for them. And it doesn't mean that that wouldn't be right for anybody else. I'm not one to say how that could be still right, because Doe didn't close the gate. So even though it's going to be unpopular for me to say that, I have to be honest and say that that's what I believe is the truth. But that wasn't necessarily going to feel right for people to do. But that doesn't mean that those people that don't feel right about laying down their life cannot qualify to grow towards having that degree of dedication and faith and recognition and awareness and consciousness of. Because all those things come about through the overcoming process when you're actually with the older members a number of times. Even like, Moses, and then with Jesus, and then with Tea and Doe, and then with Tea and Doe day and night for, even 22 years, as many of the students were. So that they're getting a ton of exposure to everything that T and Do vibrate and talk about and think and say and act, seeing if they're consistent all the time, and not that individuals were looking at them in that light, but some probably were. I know this vehicle didn't go through that, of, critical of everything T and Do said, or a lot of things that they said. I don't believe I was outwardly or inwardly critical of anything that T and Do taught, but I learned later that I did have doubts, a form of doubt. It was like a doubt where you kind of just don't want to think about it, because it's troubling, because it's a doubt, and you need to outgrow your doubts, so you kind of push it aside, and that's what I did. I pushed it aside, even though they were very tiny things and they didn't reflect on the validity of who T and Do were, except in the fact that I was questioning what they said, and so by questioning it, I was to that degree, not believing 100% in who T and Do are. But that's the process. We all have to come to that process with what we have, and we should all be, if we want to grow to as fast as we can, then we should hit the deck running. What does that mean? Just dig into it. Study everything T and Do said. I don't think there's anything wrong with watching these videos and reading things that I wrote, but what I wrote is very secondary to what T and Do wrote. But if it helps our word processor, our brains, better digest the truth from T and Do, then by all means, I hope you can get some benefit from these videos that I'm putting out, because I know they're valuable to me only because they show me in an intellectual way what I knew already. You see, I didn't come to know that T and Do were the two witnesses, or that they were the Father and Jesus, or that they were from the kingdom of God, the kingdom in the heavens, by reading about Jesus' life, or by studying the book of Revelation. I came to it because they gave me that recognition. And I lost some of that recognition when I wasn't learning my lessons. And so T and Do instigated some things that, well, T did. I don't think Do did, because he was still in his vehicle, and as he always said, they don't read us. They take what we say and what we do as the evidence of where we are in our overcoming process and our bonding. Part of that overcoming process, a big part of it, is bonding with the older member, grafting to the vine, as Jesus talked about. And T was the one that gave us the instruction to do that with Do. And Do is the one that identified T as his older member. So they were one another's witnesses. So when that symbol of the financial empire fell, it also became global and was the basis for starting the 2 wars in Afghanistan, and then justifying with additional misinformation, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and that, like Hillary Clinton said, she was told that they could see a mushroom cloud from Washington out in the ocean. They might see that happening. And do they want to wait to see that happen instead of going in there and taking care of getting rid of Saddam Hussein so that he wouldn't be able to do that? Which was like amazing, that you would think that a senator who had been a president's first lady could just take that little bit of so-called evidence that was provided on the floor of the United Nations at that time, and some testimony from this Iraqi guy, and the information that, they had weapons of mass destruction or very close to having them, take that so easily as a reason to actually invade that country and cause the death and breakup of millions and millions of people and the destruction of the entire country, to where now it's, and then leave it and let it get taken over by the remnant of probably, I understand, the Saddam Hussein supporters, who naturally are going to hate the United States, and so become the biggest instigators of the terrorist threat. So in other words, they were created, and that's where we have people leaking from the FBI saying that it was the Israelis and the United States together that were behind the start of ISIS or any of those other groups that were terrorist groups. And who knows how they were funneled money. They said, actually, this FBI guy, this leaker, said that they were funneled money through Saudi Arabia, which might account for this close relationship that we still have with Saudi Arabia, that started well before the Bushes, but was really amplified during the time of 9/11, when 40 members of the Osama bin Laden family were in Washington, D.C. at the time, and were flown out the next day when all flights were canceled of any aircraft, except for their flights, to get them out so that they wouldn't be what? Torn apart by the mobs. And the people that would look at that, want to investigate everything they had to say about Osama bin Laden. Where is he? How can we find him? Because any intelligence agency that was worth anything at all to the country would have definitely wanted to question them thoroughly. And my understanding is that they did question them on the plane, but my understanding is that it wasn't very thorough. How can you just question somebody for a couple hours and think that then you got the truth? And then especially when they were on an air flight leaving the country, so that you would lose the ability to question them once they were back in the protection of their own country. So it doesn't make sense, the way those things happen, unless there was a conspiracy going on. And I know the word conspiracy has been made into a conspiracy. And that's just typical for the way the propaganda machine works, in order to confuse things, to make this into the Babylon, which Babylon, the meaning of Babylon is confusion. So, but I want to repeat that I'm not anti-Semitic in saying this. I'm not anti-Jewish. I am anti-deceit. I am anti-killing. And I believe these are also things that, I know that T and O were very anti, and Jesus was very anti, and I believe Moses was very anti. That's why he said, live by your oaths, and Jesus said that too. Or Jesus said, actually, don't take an oath, don't swear by your head or by heaven, because you don't have control over your life, really. You know, or whether your hair turns white or black, and you're aging and all that. So you shouldn't swear by yourself, and you shouldn't swear by heaven, because you don't have that capacity. If you're not a member of the kingdom of heaven, you can't make an oath using the kingdom of heaven as the evidence of the quality of your oath. You can take an oath, and then you should live by that oath. You should try to live by that oath. If you fall away from taking that oath, then if you have a little bit of enough mind with you, and you can hear that thought that says I can recommit to following with T and O, or even now for people, if you start to follow everything they taught, and then you slide back, then if you still have that little voice in you that believes in them, grab onto it and ask for help. That's the biggest thing that you can do. And the next level will help you have that balance, so that the Luciferians don't saturate you with their misinformation, so that you don't even have the capacity to ask for help, even, or change, or recover from whatever way you thought that you slipped from your goal, which is the definition of a sin, is like not meeting the match, not yeah, that's good enough, I think, for that. But so okay, so but then it said 10th part of the city fell, and in other words, in place, the place of the earthquake, in the place of the earthquake, or the time of the earthquake, interesting, or the state of the earthquake, were slain of men 7,000. Now, one way I hadn't looked at that was in looking at it as in the time of the earthquake. In other words, in the time of the shaking up of the world and the shaking up of the United States, that became the justification for two wars that would also continue to shake the world, and are still shaking the world, with the endless war on terror, which was also prophesied to take place in Revelation 6:3, I believe it was. And so in the time of that slaying, that death, to kill outright, figuratively to destroy, so were destroyed of men, were destroyed men, that is anthropos, like anthropology. So it's talking about man-faced, a human being. So were slain of human beings 7,000. which is or 7,000. And 1,000 also has to do with being a tribe or family. So you can even say 7 tribes or 7 families, which can relate to how Revelations chapter 17 talks about there being 7 rises. And that can be seen by the 7 crowns on the head of the Statue of Liberty. The 7 spires, that are on the headdress of the Statue of Liberty. So that's the 7, that's representing the 7 genetic strains. Maybe there's 7 different colorations. I don't remember exactly. What is there? Caucasian, white, or whatever you call it, flesh, ruddy. It's kind of the same thing. Adam actually meant ruddy, red. So and so the American Indians are the most red, as the Red Indians, and the humans, become lighter, whatever. So I don't know if that's a separate race, but then you have blacks, you have yellows, you think, as they say. You have browns, and you have pale or white. So that's 5. And then maybe you have green, but you can't tell. T called me green. She said she saw green. So I looked green to her, she said to me. I believe on 2 occasions. And so I thought at the time that it meant that she was seeing, I later thought that, I think what she was seeing was that I was jealous of those that had more tasks, working closer with T and Do than I was at the time when she said that to me, which was not too long before she left. But so that's how I see the 7,000. But it could also actually be a number, 7, and 1,000 doesn't necessarily mean 1,000, but it could. It says here Chaloli is indicating 1,000, 8,000. But 7,000 didn't die in the Twin Towers collapse. But the shaking didn't include just the Twin Towers collapse. So if we're talking about the individuals that were in that city at the time where it fell, then we're talking about Americans or individuals that were at least living in New York City at the time. And if you if you count all the people that started dying because of the asbestos poisoning that many of the construction workers and firefighters got because of the dose of asbestos into their lungs, and then if you expand that to be the time of it, and in time, the time of that shaking, how long was did that time exist? And it may be still going on, that shaking. And so you might want to account or the ramifications, not my going, yeah, well, going on still, where whenever somebody dies that's an American in Afghanistan or Iraq, then that's potentially somebody dying as a result of this fall. Is one way to look at it, maybe. I mean, I guess there's one way to look at it. Whether it's the most accurate way or not, I don't know. But what I've seen in prophecy is that all these ways can be accurate in degrees. And I don't believe by making more symbolism out of the symbolism that we're getting more accurate. I think we're getting less accurate when we interpret things with more symbolism. And we find that there are a lot of Christians that do that. And they didn't know any better in a lot of ways because, as some of them know, the truth wasn't going to come until the next level came and through Jesus and revealed it. But what they didn't realize was that Jesus would be coming as one of the two witnesses. They thought it would be Moses and Elijah. And so the lower forces were actually influencing humans to not see the two witnesses as the return of Jesus. Because well, the reasons are obvious, because then more individuals would be potentially attracted to the teachings of Tiendo. And but the next level has tremendous overview of everything that's happening. And they know from experience the way the Luciferians are going to try to do stuff. But they allow it to happen because it provides us with the balance, according to Tiendo, of what we want to become. We can become either like the Luciferian space aliens, or we can become like them, the true extraterrestrials. Because the Luciferian space aliens are not allowed to leave very far away from the Earth at this time, according to Doe. And so and the remnant, the remaining ones, the others which remain, remnant, residue, rest, were frightened, were alarmed, were in fear. I know when 9/11 happened, which, I mean, my vehicle might be considered to be one of the remnant. Because, for two reasons. But primarily because I didn't leave with my class. So I remained on Earth. That much of a straightforward meaning. But it doesn't just apply to me or the dropouts. It applies to everybody that has the potential, was helped by the next level to have the potential to believe in what T and O were talking about. They're all the remnant. And that could extend to people that are devout believers in Jesus. Though I think most of those would have come out of their religious affiliations, because they would have seen how in those religions and those sects of religions of the Christianity that what Jesus was actually teaching wasn't being applied. It wasn't being emphasized. It wasn't being taught. You know, because, I mean, who could teach leaving your family behind for the kingdom of heaven's sake, for, you know, to follow with your older member? Which I know some Christians believe when Jesus comes back, then they will leave everything behind. But again, some of them weren't observing or weren't able to see T and Do as that return, but that doesn't mean that they can't still see T and Do as that return now. They, like we all get many chances to advance in grades in school, and to graduate, and to recover from falls. I guess I said that over and over again. So, so I don't know how many this could have been. This could be millions for all I know. And they gave glory to God of heaven. So this is clearly showing that these are individuals that are believers in T and Do and the true kingdom of God, regardless of how they identify with that, regardless of how they talk about it, what terms they use. Some people might say, I believe in a higher power. I know that's kind of nebulous, but it's it's true. I mean, even if you say I believe in a cosmic consciousness and I believe in a universal mind, there's a certain amount of truth to that, of course, but it's not specific enough to the way that T and Do were trying to bring us up to date, to have, by speaking plainly and boldly and truthfully about the reality of the next level, in terms of the facts about the next level's existence and what they were really all about. That was all the that's the criteria that this remnant were given to be able to grab onto after T and Do left. And there could be 144,000 of these individuals, or 144,000 minus 42. I don't know, because maybe that number, well, in that verse in Revelation 14:1 does indicate that that includes everybody, but well, it doesn't really actually. There is an indication that the 24, I think, weren't part of that number. And I went through that number for a long, long time, trying to figure out all the different ways that could be interpreted. And I wrote a lot of it, the process, in the book. So you can look for it there. I'm not going to go through it now because it's too much to try to bring into my head right now. But this remnant, I remember when I heard about 9/11, I was in an office building actually, working as a computer programmer for a corporation, and we were actually, I was working in the newspaper industry, having to do with software that works with the newspaper industry. And I was watching on the internet the live footage of the buildings burning, like a lot of people were, and that was just 20 miles from where I was, and so it was very real. But when I saw that, I thought to me that this was like an Armageddon thing, and I wasn't into talking about or thinking about Armageddon before that. T and Do were never doomsdayers. And we didn't know scripture in the group much. I mean, a little bit, because we did some study in the 90s. And I did a little bit of study when I was growing up, but I don't know. Maybe some other classmates knew a lot about it, but I'm only aware of 3 or 4 that really gravitated towards doing the unassigned task of becoming familiar with the scriptures, because that's all that was necessary for us to. Well, anyway, I won't get into that. That's off the track, but of what I'm talking about. But so that remnant gave glory to God in heaven. So they knew that this was, like I said, an Armageddon kind of event. Okay, well, it certainly was. Because there were going to be a lot of people that were going to be choosing to go with that government and go and conquer Iraq and, you know, and get rid of Afghanistan to get those terrorists and to, you know, punish them for harboring terrorists and, you know, so that we, you know, people in the United States would be, you know, have the last word and all that. So I mean, even though I didn't know all that was going to happen at the time, I knew this was a significant ominous event that didn't take brain science or a special person to see that. But I remember saying to my boss at the time, who I had a pretty flexible relationship with, that I've got to go home. I just wanted to be with my newborn daughter and my partner. So I drove home. But, and that's when I got a big chunk of, I believe, awakening. Start to brew in me. So by seeing it as related to the next level, that is giving glory to God. When you're giving glory to God, doesn't mean like, you know, jumping out up and down and waving your arms in the air and, you know, shouting, singing glory to God, glory to God, glory to God. You know, that's not giving glory to God. I mean, it's a degree of it. It's recognizing that God exists. So I shouldn't be, I apologize for acting a little sarcastic maybe when I said that, about people that are doing that. I shouldn't be that way. That's an influence with me that I need to conquer. And I've seen that influence crop up in other ways. But sarcasm is one of my faults, one of my evil boogers that I have to conquer. Along with my ego. And I've been reminded of that recently, and that comes across as arrogant. And I know can. Arrogant as, you know, like know-it-all kind of vibration. That's why Carl, I think, has the most trouble with me, is because I sound like I know it all sometimes. Maybe all the time, I don't know. I'm not going to change that when it comes to what I know about Tea and Dough, because that's not for me. That's not about self at all. If I talk about Tea and Dough, there's no self in it. The self comes in, and even in these scriptures, myself isn't in it necessarily, just because I'm reading them, studying them, and coming up with interpretations, and interpretations that might even include my vehicle and soul. So, and the fact that it said God in heaven, that's talking about tea, but it's also talking about dough equally, because they're both gods in heaven, even though one is an older god than the other. Just like the new members of the next level are all considered to be gods, could be considered to be gods to humans. That's why Jesus said that the greatest human was John the Baptist, and that even the least in the kingdom of heaven was greater than John the Baptist. So I'm really getting tired, and I I think I accomplished what I wanted to in this verse. And there's probably more to see. So stay tuned for updates, and if you want them, and try to, if you see things that I don't see, let me know so I can examine it. And well, good night.